Grandeur of the inauguration was palpable. Cheers echoing through the National Mall, flags waving, and history unfolding. Donald Trump, surrounded by his family, stepped out of the motorcade with an expression of triumph. But just as he prepared to ascend the steps of the Capitol, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, expecting a congratulatory message or a routine update. Instead, his heart stopped. A text message read, "We have Barron, stay quiet or he dies." For the man about to become the most powerful leader in the free world, everything had just changed. The weight of the presidency paled in comparison to the dread sinking into his chest. He tightened his jaw, put the phone back in his pocket, and forced a smile for the cameras. The show had to go on, for now. The swearing-in ceremony proceeded as planned, a grand spectacle of tradition and patriotism, but Trump's mind was a storm of unease. Every word of the oath felt like a chain coiling tighter around his chest, each syllable reverberating with a sense of impending doom. The applause roared like a tidal wave, drowning out the faint voice of his inner thoughts. He gripped Melania's hand tightly, his knuckles white with tension. She turned to him, her expression a mask of poise, but her voice low with concern. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her eyes searching his face. He didn't answer. He couldn't, not here, under the watchful gaze of millions. Cameras flashed, the crowd cheered, and dignitaries lined up to offer their congratulations. He nodded, smiled, and played the part of a man stepping into power, but inside, he was unraveling. As soon as the ceremony concluded, he was whisked away to the presidential motorcade. The cheers outside faded into a muffled hum, replaced by the low rumble of the engine. The tinted windows offered privacy, but not solace. Trump reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out his phone. The message was still there, glaring back at him like a dark omen. "Your son's life is in your hands. Do as we say or he won't see another sunrise." He reread it, his stomach churning. Before he could fully process the weight of the words, his phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed nothing, no number, no name, just a blank void. He stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. His finger hovered over the button for what felt like an eternity before he finally swiped to accept the call. "Well," his voice was low, steady on the surface, but tinged with an undercurrent of dread. A distorted voice crackled on the line, robotic yet chillingly deliberate. "Congratulations, Mr. President. Now let's see how much you're willing to sacrifice for your son." Trump's throat tightened. He tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could muster anything, the line went dead. The silence in the car was deafening. He stared at the phone, his reflection distorted in his screen. This wasn't random. It wasn't about money or politics. This was deeply personal. His instincts, sharpened by years of navigating ruthless deals and power plays, told him the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. He clenched his fist, his mind racing through possibilities. Who could be behind this? What did they want? The thought of his son in danger lit a fire in his chest, equal parts fear and rage. Whatever it took, whoever he had to face, he would do it. But first, he needed answers. As the motorcade pulled up to the White House, Trump's expression hardened. The weight of the presidency had always been immense. But this was something else entirely. The battle for his son's life had just begun. The room was an abyss of shadows, its cold grip seeping into Barron's bones. The walls were slick with moisture, and the pungent scent of mildew clawed at his senses. Faint sounds echoed, distant water, distant footsteps, each one more menacing than the last. His wrists ached from the tight ropes that bit into his skin, the coarse fibers leaving angry red marks. His captors loomed in the periphery, their faces obscured by a grotesque mask that made them appear inhuman. And Barron's chest tightened as fear wrapped itself around him like a suffocating fog. He strained to remember how he ended up here. It had started as an ordinary morning, or so he thought. He'd been in the warmth of the family library, engaged in a lively chess game with one of the Secret Service agents assigned to him. The agent had joked about how Barron's strategic moves mirrored his father's. It made him proud. Then came the car ride, a routine trip to the inauguration. Barron barely noticed the subtle change at first, the driver's uniform slightly ill-fitted, his demeanor colder than usual. It wasn't until they passed the turn toward the Capitol that unease gnawed at him. "Where are we going?" Barron had asked. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes dark and piercing. Panic surged, but before Barron could react, a sharp pain at the base of his skull plunged him into unconsciousness. Now, in the oppressive darkness, Barron's mind raced. He struggled against the ropes, his heart hammering in his chest. Every creak of the floorboards above sent a jolt through him. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. A whisper against the void. Dad will come for me. He repeated it over and over, a fragile shield against the terror threatening to consume him. He pictured his father, relentless and determined, tearing through any obstacle in his path. Barron clung to that image, his only light in the suffocating darkness. Time felt like an eternity. Each second stretched, the silence pressing against him until he could no longer tell if the sounds he heard were real or imagined. In the distance, a door creaked open. Footsteps echoed, growing louder with every step. Barron stiffened, his breath hitching as shadows shifted in the faint light spilling from the doorway. His captors approached, their masked faces a grim reminder that he was alone, for now. But deep in his heart, Barron held on to one unshakable belief. His father wouldn't rest until he was safe, and neither would he. It was late in the evening, mere hours after the inauguration, when Donald Trump convened an emergency meeting in the Oval Office. The air was taut with urgency, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the room, as his closest advisors, top intelligence officials, and key security personnel filed in. Trump's demeanor was uncharacteristically grim. He motioned for everyone to take their seats before he leaned forward on the resolute desk, his knuckles white as he gripped its edge. "This does not leave this room," he began, his voice a low growl that brooked no argument. "The media must not know. The moment they catch a whiff of this, Barron becomes a pawn, a bargaining chip we can't afford." An uneasy murmur rippled through the room, but it was quickly silenced when the FBI director cleared his throat and stepped forward. He placed a thin folder on the desk, the contents sparse but damning. "Mr. President, we've confirmed this is no random act. The kidnappers are highly skilled. No fingerprints, no digital traces, and no witnesses so far. The operation was meticulous. Whoever orchestrated this has significant resources and access to classified level logistics. They're professionals." Trump's jaw tightened as he scanned the folder. The lack of progress infuriated him. He slammed it shut, the sound echoing through the room. "So what you're saying is that the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, can't find my son?" His voice was a mixture of fury and desperation. The room fell silent. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared speak. In the corner, Melanie sat perched on a high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. She had remained silent throughout the briefing, her icy calm a stark contrast to Trump's palpable rage. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Donald, we need him back. Do whatever it takes." Her words seemed to pierce through the chaos in his mind. Trump turned to her, their eyes locking for a moment that felt like an eternity. For all his bluster and bravado, it was clear that this was more than a crisis of national security. It was deeply personal. He straightened, his resolve hardening. "I don't care what it takes," he said, his voice quieter but no less commanding. "Mobilize every asset we have. We find him, and we bring him home." The meeting ended abruptly as Trump dismissed everyone, his parting words ringing in their ears. No leaks, no excuses. Failure is not an option. As the advisors filed out, Trump remained behind, staring out the window into the darkness of the Washington night. For the first time in his presidency, the weight of his position felt crushing, not because of political pressures or global scrutiny, but because his family had been pulled into the crosshairs. In the stillness of the Oval Office, Melania approached him. Without a word, she placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't look at her, but covered her hand with his own. "We'll get him back," he said softly, more to himself than to her. And for the first time that night, his voice wavered. Just when hope seemed to be slipping away, a breakthrough came. The FBI intercepted a suspicious transfer of funds to an offshore account linked to a shadowy network of mercenaries notorious for high-profile kidnappings. The lead pointed to a remote warehouse on the outskirts of the city, hidden among dilapidated industrial complexes and surrounded by dense foliage. The tension in the Situation Room was palpable. Experts analyzed blueprints, drone images, and intercepted communications in real time. Every second counted. Trump demanded to be kept informed every step of the way. Pacing back and forth, his usually composed demeanor gave way to raw emotion. He insisted on being directly involved, despite vehement protests from his security team. "This is my son," he growled through clenched teeth. "No one fights harder for him than me. No one." As the task force prepared for a raid, Trump's phone buzzed ominously. A new message from the kidnappers appeared. "On wrong move and borrow to dies." The word sent a chilling wave of fear through him, gripping his chest like a vice. His advisors tried to reassure him, emphasizing the precision of their plan, but the ultimatum weighed heavily on him. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error was non. The clock ticked relentlessly, each passing second amplifying the gravity of the situation. Trump leaned in, his face etched with determination and anguish. This was more than a rescue mission. It was a battle for his family, his legacy, and his ability to protect the one person he held dearest. With no room for mistakes, every breath felt like a gamble, and the raid would either be a triumphant rescue or a devastating loss. The dim warehouse was a chaotic blend of shadows and murmurs. Barron sat on a cold, dusty floor, his hands bound tightly behind him. His heart raced, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. Around him, the kidnappers argued heatedly, their voices bouncing off the concrete walls. "Do you think he's going to pay up?" one man snapped, his voice dripping with tension. "He won't have a choice," another replied. "The boss made it clear Trump's not walking away from this untouched." Barron's ears perked up. "The boss?" His sharp mind latched onto the words, piecing together fragments of their conversation. A powerful figure was orchestrating this operation, someone with deep pockets and an even deeper grudge against his father. As fear coursed through his veins, Barron clung to a memory of his father's words. "Tough times don't last, but tough people do." He straightened his posture, refusing to let the panic take over. Suddenly, he tested the ropes binding his wrists. They were tight but not unbreakable. Using his fingers, he began to work at the knot, inching closer to freedom with every tug. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his resolve only grew stronger. In the distance, he caught a faint glimmer of moonlight streaming through a cracked window. It illuminated a pile of crates stacked haphazardly near the wall. If he could just get to them, he might find something to cut through the ropes or use his weapon. The kidnapper's argument escalated, providing him the perfect cover. "I told you we should have moved him by now," one shouted, slamming a fist on a nearby table. "And I told you we wait for the signal. You want to mess this up and deal with him?" the other barked back, his tone laced with fear. Barron's mind raced. Whoever he was, he terrified the kidnappers. That gave Barron a small sliver of hope. If they were afraid, they might make mistakes. Working faster, he felt the ropes begin to loosen. His fingers ached, but he ignored the pain. Just a little more, he thought. He glanced at the cracked window again, imagining the fresh air and freedom that awaited him on the other side. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for his family. The sound of footsteps snapped him back to the present. One of the kidnappers approached, a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Barron froze, his heart pounding like a drum. If they noticed the loosened ropes, it would all be over. The man stopped a few feet away, shining the light directly at Barron. "Don't even think about trying anything, kid," he sneered. Barron forced a defiant glare, masking the fear swirling inside him. "You'll see what I'm capable of soon enough," he thought silently. As the man turned away, Barron resumed his efforts with renewed determination. He wasn't just escaping, he was proving to himself that he had the strength to face any challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. The raid was meticulously planned, each detail reviewed and rehearsed to perfection. Helicopters hovered silently above the warehouse, their infrared cameras scanning for movement, while heavily armed FBI and Secret Service agents prepared to breach the premises. The air crackled with tension as orders were relayed through earpieces. Inside the Situation Room, the atmosphere was equally charged. Trump, against the repeated advice of his security team, insisted on watching the live feed. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table, his eyes glued to the monitor. The hum of machinery and whispered conversations around him felt distant, overshadowed by the thudding of his own heartbeat. Under the cover of darkness, the team moved in. Shadows danced on the walls as agents stormed the warehouse, their movements swift and coordinated. The sound of shattering glass and muffled footsteps gave way to the sharp crack of gunfire. Trump flinched at each shot, the tension in the room palpable. Minutes felt like hours. Then came the breakthrough. A voice crackled over the comms. "We've got him!" The camera feed shifted, showing agents forcing open a reinforced door. Inside, Barron sat in a dimly lit room, his face pale but determined. He looked up as the door burst open, blinking against a sudden flood of light. "Barron's safe," an agent confirmed, their voice steady despite the chaos. In the Situation Room, Trump's breath hitched. He leaned forward, his eyes glistening as the camera zoomed in on his son being escorted out by agents. For the first time that night, a flicker of relief crossed his face. When they finally reunited, the moment was nothing short of emotional. Trump enveloped Barron in a tight embrace, holding him as if he'd never let go. His voice broke as he whispered, "I told you I'd come for you. You're safe now. You're home." Barron, visibly shaken but brave, managed a small smile. Knew you would, Dad. Behind them, the agents exchanged knowing glances, silently acknowledging the weight of what had just transpired. The mission was a success, but the emotional toll was evident on everyone involved. As they exited the warehouse, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a fitting backdrop to a hard-won victory. For Trump, it was not just the rescue of his son, but a reaffirmation of his unyielding determination and love for his family. The dust settled, but the scars of the ordeal remained. The FBI's relentless investigation had uncovered not just the identities of the kidnappers, but also the sinister mastermind pulling the strings, a powerful political rival who sought to destabilize the presidency and exploit chaos for personal gain. For Trump, the betrayal was not just political, it was deeply personal. Those he had trusted with his vision for the country had been complicit in the plot. The revelation sent shockwaves through the nation, igniting debates about loyalty, power, and the lengths people would go to for political dominance. The media swarmed, and the world held its breath as Trump prepared to address the nation. Seated in the Oval Office with Melania by his side, he looked directly into the camera. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of a man who had faced the abyss and come out stronger. Today, I was reminded of what truly matters: family, love, and the resilience of the human spirit. These are the bedrock values that no political agenda can ever erode. This was not just an attack on me or my family. It was an attack on the principles we hold dear as Americans. To those who tried to break me, let me be clear. You underestimated the strength of my resolve. I will always fight for my family, for truth, and for this great nation. The nation watched in stunned silence, moved by his words. The address transcended politics, resonating with people from all walks of life. But the fight wasn't over. As the investigation deepened, more allies turned traitors were exposed, forcing Trump to confront hard truths about loyalty and ambition in the corridors of power. Yet in the face of adversity, he found renewed purpose. In the days that followed, Trump launched an initiative called America United, aimed at restoring trust and transparency in government. His family, once at the center of the storm, became symbols of resilience. Barron, inspired by the experience, spoke at a youth summit about the importance of integrity and standing up for what's right. As the chapter closed on the darkest episode of his presidency, Trump emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. A leader redefined by the fires of adversity, and for the nation, the ordeal served as a stark reminder. Democracy is fragile, but the collective will to protect it is indomitable. As Trump and his family walked into the White House together, the weight of the ordeal lingered, but their bond was stronger than ever. The nation watched as a father's love triumphed over adversity. This isn't just a story about power or politics. It's about the strength of a family and the lengths we'll go to protect the ones we love. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and remember, no matter the odds, love always wins.